The thing that I love most is when I start looking at their pieces. Like that's one of those teams that we were talking about. I talk about dangerous players that enter into the playoffs. Mm-hmm. Jalen Johnson is dangerous. When you start talking about it, not too many people can match up with Cade over there, but he actually physically and stature can do it. Statistically can do it. So it's like I look at Jalen Johnson breaking out and having that army around him now. He's starting to feel it a little bit. You see it in the shoulders.
The past 4 years, the Atlanta Hawks have been stuck in the middle, never bad enough to rebuild, but never good enough to truly compete. A play-in team on repeat. And just when it felt like they had hit their ceiling, they made a shocking move, trading their franchise player, and somehow everything changed.
Here's a guy who can do more.
Oh, hello, Jalen, right down the middle.
Since the All-Star break, the Atlanta Hawks have gone 20-6. That's not just a solid stretch. That's one of the best records in the league over that span. They went from barely hanging onto playoff hopes to locking in a top 6 seed, winning their division, and turning into one of the hottest teams in the entire NBA. But this isn't just a hot streak. This is something deeper. Because if you actually watch them now, this doesn't even look like the same team. The ball moves differently. Possessions feel more connected. Roles are clearer. And the identity that once felt stuck in neutral suddenly looks sharp, aggressive, and intentional. A player who was brought in to be a sixth man is now exploding into a major offensive weapon. The system has changed too. Spacing is cleaner, decision-making is quicker, and the offense no longer revolves around one player dominating the ball every trip down the floor. So the real question becomes simple. How did the Hawks get better after trading their best player? Because once you understand what changed, you start to see why this might be the one team in the East nobody wants to deal with. When the news first broke that Atlanta had finally pulled the trigger and traded Trae Young to the Washington Wizards, the reaction was instant, and honestly pretty confused. That's it? No massive haul of draft picks. No franchise-altering return. Just a deal centered around CJ McCollum and a secondary piece. On the surface, it didn't feel like a move that made Atlanta better. It felt like a step sideways, maybe even backward. Because when you trade your franchise player, especially a 4-time All-Star and All-NBA level guard, the expectation is clear. You either get better immediately, or you load up for the future. This looked like neither. But behind the scenes, this wasn't a sudden decision. It had been building for a while. Contract talks had stalled. A massive extension, reportedly pushing close to $49 million per year, was looming. And the front office had a choice to make. Commit long-term to Trae Young or pivot toward flexibility and a different kind of roster. They chose flexibility, but the real justification for that decision wasn't happening in meeting rooms. It was happening on the court, because as talented as Trae Young is, and there's no denying that talent, he's also one of the most polarizing players in the league. An elite playmaker who can control an offense at the highest level, but also a player whose efficiency can fluctuate and whose defensive limitations are well documented. For years, the Hawks lived with that trade-off. The offensive brilliance outweighed everything else. Until this season, when something shifted. Early in the year, when Trae went down with an injury, something unexpected happened. Atlanta didn't fall apart. They actually started to look better. Over that stretch, the Hawks went 16-13 without him. Not dominant, but solid. Then, when he returned, they went just 2-8. And suddenly, there was a pattern that was getting harder and harder to ignore. But it wasn't just about wins and losses. It was about how they were playing. With Trae on the floor, Atlanta's defensive rating ballooned to around 126. Easily one of the worst marks in the league. Without him, that number dropped all the way down to 112, which put them closer to a top 10 defense. That's not a small difference. That's a complete identity shift. And maybe the most surprising part? Trae wasn't playing selfish basketball. He was trying to adapt, moving off the ball more, deferring to teammates, even putting in more effort on defense. But it still didn't fully work, because this version of the Hawks needed something different. They needed length, versatility, energy, a group that could switch across positions, rotate quickly, and actually hold up defensively against modern NBA offenses. And for the first time in years, it became clear that in order for Atlanta to take that next step, they had to move away from the Trae Young model. Not because he wasn't good enough, but because the team had outgrown what he represented. So when a trade finally happened, bringing in players like CJ McCollum, it didn't feel like a win-now move. It felt like a reset. But in reality, it was the beginning of something completely different. A shift away from isolation-heavy offense, toward balance, toward structure, toward a team that finally makes sense on both ends of the floor. And now, with the way they're playing, that decision doesn't look confusing anymore. It looks intentional.
Through the double team, CJ for the lead.
Since the trade, CJ McCollum has become far more important than anyone expected, and honestly, that might be underselling it. What he's brought to the Atlanta Hawks isn't just scoring or experience. It's stability, it's fit, it's reliability, and those are exactly the things this team had been missing for years. For a long time, Atlanta struggled with consistency. One night the offense would look unstoppable. The next it would completely stall out. But with McCollum now running the show, there's a sense of control that just wasn't there before. He can generate offense without everything breaking down. He doesn't need to dominate the ball to be effective. And more importantly, he understands how to manage pace when games start to get chaotic. That's been one of the most underrated parts of his impact. When possessions get messy, when defenses tighten up, when the game slows down, McCollum doesn't panic. He organizes, he settles things, he makes the right read, and that alone has changed the rhythm of this entire team. What's even more surprising is how naturally he's fit into Atlanta's system. Instead of stopping the ball, he keeps it moving. Quick decisions, smart reads, controlled aggression. He's picking his spots instead of forcing them, attacking mismatches when they appear, and providing that second layer of offense when the first option gets taken away. That's why his production doesn't feel streaky. It feels repeatable, sustainable. What initially looked like a secondary piece in the trade is now playing like a genuine difference maker. And this ties into a bigger issue the Hawks have dealt with for years. It was never about talent. It was about fit. When everything runs through a ball-dominant guard like Trae Young, it naturally limits what everyone else can become. Role players become spectators. Offensive flow becomes predictable. And while that system can produce big numbers, it can also cap the ceiling of the entire roster. But once that structure changed, everything opened up. Now Jalen Johnson has the freedom to operate as a primary creator in certain sets. Dyson Daniels has stepped into a much larger role, especially on the defensive end. And McCollum has become the stabilizing force that ties it all together. The ceiling of this team didn't just stay the same after the trade, it rose. Statistically, the impact backs it up. McCollum is averaging around 18.7 points and 4.1 assists in under 30 minutes per game. And what makes that even more impressive is that his three-point shot hasn't even been falling at his usual career level. He's still producing efficiently without relying on hot shooting stretches. But his value goes far beyond the box score. He's comfortable both on and off the ball, which keeps the offense unpredictable. Defenders have to respect his pull-up game, his shooting gravity, and his ability to create off the dribble. And even when he's not taking the shot, he's influencing the possession, creating space for cutters, opening lanes for rollers, and forcing defensive rotations that lead to better looks. Most importantly, the team is just better with him on the floor. With McCollum playing, Atlanta has posted a plus 10.2 net rating. Their offense is operating at a 114.9 rating, and it's not coming from one-dimensional scoring. It's coming from balance, from multiple players contributing, from a system that doesn't rely on one player to do everything. And that contrast matters, because McCollum isn't being asked to be the entire offense. He's playing within it, a score-first guard whose playmaking complements the system instead of defining it. And since taking over as a starting point guard, he's led the Hawks to a 76% win percentage in games he starts, one of the highest marks for any starter in franchise history. If you had said at the beginning of the season that Atlanta would be in this position without Trae Young, with McCollum leading the way, it would have sounded ridiculous. But here they are, and it raises an even bigger question. If the offense is no longer built around a superstar, then what's actually driving the success? Because teams don't go 20-6 by accident. To understand that, you have to look at what the Hawks struggled with for years: defense. For as long as Trae Young was the face of the franchise, defense was always the weak point. Not necessarily because of effort, but because of structural limitations that opposing teams could exploit over and over again. That flaw consistently capped how far Atlanta could go. So when the Hawks moved on from Trae, it wasn't just an offensive adjustment. It was a philosophical shift. They made a conscious decision to commit to defense, to build an identity on that end of the floor. And since the All-Star break, that decision has completely reshaped the team. Atlanta now holds a 107.4 defensive rating over that stretch, ranking second in the entire league. During their 11-game win streak, that number dropped even further to 104.2, making them the best defensive team in the NBA during that span. And it shows up in how they win games. The Hawks are forcing turnovers at an elite rate, consistently ranking near the top of the league in defensive disruption. But what separates them isn't just getting stops, it's what they do after. They turn defense into offense. Atlanta leads the league in points off turnovers, which means every defensive stop has the potential to immediately become scoring on the other end. That kind of momentum shift puts constant pressure on opponents and creates easy opportunities without needing a traditional star to carry the load. On top of that, their rebounding has taken a massive leap. Before the All-Star break, this was a clear weakness. They ranked near the bottom of the league in both offensive and defensive rebounding percentages. Night after night, they were losing the second chance battle and putting themselves at a disadvantage. But since the break, that weakness has flipped into a strength. They now rank 7th in offensive rebounding percentage and 3rd in defensive rebounding. That improvement has translated directly into results, with Atlanta winning the second chance points battle by nearly 6 points per game, one of the best marks in the league. That's not just effort, that's commitment, that's identity, and it doesn't stop there. Their perimeter defense has sharpened significantly. Opponents are getting fewer open three-point looks and are being forced into more heavily contested shots. Even when teams do find space, Atlanta's pressure makes those shots more difficult than they should be. A huge part of that transformation comes back to head coach Quin Snyder, who has rebuilt the team around communication, effort, and discipline on every possession. There's no single elite rim protector anchoring everything. Instead, it's a collective system. Players rotating on time, fighting through screens, staying connected, refusing to give up easy looks. And one of the biggest structural changes has come in the backcourt. Atlanta has fully leaned into length and defensive versatility with players like Dyson Daniels and Nickeil Alexander-Walker. Together, they've set the tone for everything the Hawks do on that end of the floor. Over a 20-game stretch from late February to early April, Atlanta led the NBA in turnover rate, forcing mistakes on over 17% of possessions. That kind of pressure disrupts rhythm, breaks offenses apart, and creates chaos that the Hawks thrive in. Daniels, in particular, has taken a massive leap. After a breakout season where he led the league in steals and earned all defensive first-team honors, he's carried that momentum forward. His instincts, timing, and ability to anticipate passing lanes make him one of the most disruptive defenders in the league. But what makes this defensive duo so effective is how different they are. Daniels is precise, calculated. He relies on positioning, timing, and anticipation. Alexander-Walker brings physicality, length, relentless pressure. He fights through screens, deflects passes, and makes life uncomfortable for ball handlers. Together, they create a level of defensive intensity that fuels the entire system. But it's not just the perimeter. Onyeka Okongwu has anchored the paint, stepping into a larger role and playing heavy minutes. His willingness to do the dirty work, boxing out, contesting shots, rotating at the right time, has been critical. And because of that, players like Jalen Johnson are free to roam, clean up plays, and make an impact in multiple areas. When you put it all together, this isn't just a team that got hot. This is a team that found its identity, a team that finally makes sense on both ends of the floor. And that's why they've gone from stuck in the middle to becoming one of the most dangerous teams in the East. What really unlocks everything for Atlanta is how versatile they've become across the board. They can crash the glass, force turnovers, and immediately push the pace in transition. At this point, the Atlanta Hawks can roll out multiple lineups filled with capable on-ball defenders, adjusting to different matchups without losing intensity or structure. A lineup featuring Jalen Johnson, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Dyson Daniels, Onyeka Okongwu, and CJ McCollum is long, switchable, and relentless. It's the kind of group that doesn't just defend, it wears you down over the course of a game. Every possession feels harder. Every look feels contested. And over time, that pressure adds up. The results reflect that shift. Under head coach Quin Snyder, Atlanta dominated the month of March, leading the Eastern Conference in wins while posting one of the best point differentials in the league. They ranked near the top in turnovers forced, points off turnovers, and overall defensive rating. This isn't a phase or a lucky run. It's their identity now. But this transformation doesn't happen without key players stepping into bigger roles. And it starts with Jalen Johnson. Johnson has turned this season into a full breakout. He earned his first All-Star selection and seamlessly stepped into the role left behind by Trae Young. What makes that so impressive is how natural it's looked. There's no forcing the issue, no awkward transition. He simply expanded into the role. During March alone, Johnson averaged over 22 points, 8.5 rebounds, and 8.5 assists per game, while leading Atlanta to a dominant 13-2 record. Over the full season, he's putting up roughly 22.5 points, 10.3 rebounds, and 7.9 assists, numbers that place him in rare historical company. Very few players in NBA history have ever maintained that level of production across scoring, rebounding, and playmaking. But it's not just about the stats. It's about how he gets them. Johnson can initiate offense as a primary ball handler, run pick and roll as both the handler and the screener, finish above the rim, push in transition, and create opportunities for teammates. There are very few forwards in the league who can impact the game in so many different ways on a nightly basis. And that's exactly why this new version of the Hawks works. Instead of building around a single ball-dominant guard, Atlanta now runs through a player who expands the system rather than limiting it. Johnson doesn't just control possessions. He connects them. He makes the game easier for everyone around him. Of course, there are still areas for growth, but the overall impact is undeniable. Most importantly, he's made the jump to being a true first option look effortless. Then there's the emergence of Nickeil Alexander-Walker, which might be the most surprising development of all. Last season, Alexander-Walker was viewed as a solid rotation guard. He averaged under 10 points per game and was primarily used in a low-usage role. But in Atlanta, that version of him is gone. This season, he's exploded to over 20 points per game, one of the biggest scoring jumps in the league in recent years. And this isn't empty production. It's efficient, high-level scoring that's directly impacting wins. Over a stretch of games since early March, he's been averaging over 24 points per game on elite efficiency, shooting at a level that separates real growth from a temporary hot streak. He's hitting nearly half of his three-point attempts while also finishing efficiently inside the arc. And he's doing it in big moments. He dropped a career-high 41 points in a key win over the Orlando Magic and followed it up with another high-scoring performance against the New York Knicks, showing that he can scale his game when the pressure rises. Originally brought in as a third guard, he's now become a central scoring option and a legitimate most improved player candidate. But what makes his leap even more valuable is that it's not one-dimensional. Alexander Walker is also a strong defender, which perfectly aligns with Atlanta's new identity. He's active, physical, and disruptive, adding another layer to a defense that thrives on pressure and versatility. When you combine that with the impact of Dyson Daniels, one of the league's best at generating steals, and the interior presence of Onyeka Okongwu, you start to see the bigger picture. This isn't just a team that scores. This is a team that controls games. They force turnovers, dominate the glass, contest shots, and convert defense into offense at an elite level. And because they have multiple players who can create offense, McCollum, Alexander Walker, and Johnson, there's no longer a single point of failure. That balance is what makes them dangerous. Defenses can't key in on one player anymore. There's no simple solution, no obvious adjustment. Every possession requires decisions, rotations, and reactions. And the Hawks take advantage of that complexity. That's what separates them from the past. This isn't a one-star system. It's a connected group that actually fits together. A roster built with intention. A system where players amplify each other instead of competing for control. And because of that, they've become the kind of team nobody wants to face in the playoffs. Atlanta finished the regular season 46-36, securing a top 6 seed and avoiding the play-in tournament for the first time in years. Now, they turn their attention to a first-round matchup against the New York Knicks. On paper, it's a competitive series. The Knicks bring physicality and defensive toughness, but they've also shown inconsistency on the offensive end. That makes this matchup less about reputation and more about execution. Playoff basketball is about adjustments, and this series is likely to come down to which team can adapt faster. The Knicks are a serious opponent, no question, but they're not overwhelming favorites. And that alone tells you how far Atlanta has come, because this isn't a team that's just happy to be here. This is a team that believes it can win, a team that has already rewritten its identity once this season, and might not be done rewriting the narrative in the Eastern Conference. So now the question shifts to you. Are the Hawks truly built for a deep playoff run? Or is this still too small a sample to fully trust? Because one thing is clear, this version of Atlanta is very real. And the rest of the East is starting to feel it.